very special guest today. Senator Ted Cruz joins the show in just a moment, right after I tell you about our sponsor for today's episode, All Family Pharmacy. Listen, you and I both know that the cost of healthcare in America is completely out of control. Prescription drugs in particular are often way more expensive here than in almost any other country, which is grossly unfair. Thank goodness that's finally starting to change because President Trump just signed a new executive order to bring those prices down. Definitely a step in the right direction, but while the system catches up to that executive order, All Family Pharmacy is stepping up. They are not waiting around for policy to kick in. They are taking action now to benefit you. From now until June 30th, you can get 20% off all medications, no insurance required. And when I say medications, I'm talking medications that have been subject to gatekeeping by big pharma and big government in the past. You know which ones I'm talking about. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, in addition to your daily maintenance meds and more. There are over 200 different medication options, and they ship really quickly with a doctor's prescription included in your shipment. Check them out. allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Use code Liz20 to claim your 20% off. Get the meds you need. Keep them on hand. This is a Maha thing. Take control of your health the way it should be. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Use code Liz20 for 20% off today. And on that note, we're going to get right to it. We have a very special guest on today's episode. We're excited to bring him on, Senator Ted Cruz from the great state of Texas. Senator, good to see you.
Liz, always great to see you. It's been way too long.
It has, and you have had quite a week, to say the least. It has been entertaining for us to watch, I will tell you. It's been entertaining to watch the whole arc of what happened. After you talked to Tucker Carlson, then we saw the airstrikes by the U.S. military directed by Trump on Iran's nuclear sites. I want to ask you some questions about this. Sure. I told my audience at the time after I watched your debate with Tucker Carlson, I gave them my analysis. You and I are fairly aligned on foreign policy, neither isolationists nor neocons, of course, kind of. What did you call yourself? A non-interventionist hawk? Exactly. America first. Yeah. And I'm pretty much aligned with that. I thought you made your case very cogently to Tucker Carlson. Here's my question, though. There are some questions that are left over after this military attack against Iran. For example, we've seen conflicting reports on how much damage was actually done to the nuclear sites in Iran, and not just the sites, but the nuclear material, that uranium specifically. Kind of how many years or months we set them back in their nuclear program. You are on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. You have access to this kind of intelligence. What are the real answers to those questions? How much damage was done?
Well, listen, there was a leaked report that CNN breathlessly reported that said that this just set Iran's program back a couple of months. I find that claim very dubious. If you look at the ordnance in particular that the United States dropped, we sent 7 B-2 stealth bombers. They dropped a total of 14 bunker buster bombs. Each one of those bombs is 30,000 pounds of explosives. They are massive bombs. They are the largest ordnance we have short of a nuclear weapon. These bunker busters are designed specifically to penetrate an underground bunker, to penetrate with respect to Fordow. Fordow was Iran's nuclear weapons research lab, and it was built under a mountain to make it very difficult to bomb. And because of that, Israel did not have large enough ordnance to penetrate it. The bunker busters, the reason that President Trump ordered the bunker busters to be sent is because they're designed to be able to penetrate an underground bunker just like that and detonate underground. Now, and 14 bunker busters, this is the first time these bombs have been used in combat. The mission was carried out flawlessly. Our servicemen and women who flew all the way around the world, delivered the ordnance and flew back with 0 American casualties. It was a remarkable and precise military strike. On top of that, we had a sub that delivered roughly 25 Tomahawk missiles that also carry considerable explosive power. So on the face of it, the claim that little damage was done is really hard to believe. Now, I will say, the Senate had a classified briefing scheduled yesterday with the senior military leaders. That has been rescheduled to tomorrow. So I have not yet had a classified briefing on exactly what we know about the results. I know what we fired, and I've seen the satellite pictures that everyone else has. Tomorrow at the classified briefing, I'm certain all the senators are going to be asking, okay, what do we know? What do we know about the centrifuges? Were they destroyed? What do we know about the enriched uranium? What information do we have? But I will say, on the face of it, I think it is reasonable to infer that when you drop 14, 30,000 pound bombs, you do a heck of a lot of damage. And that's certainly the most reasonable inference, but we'll know more when we get the classified briefing tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not like you're just mussing up the landscaping with an ordinance like that. Here's a question too, though. It's not like you can just go to these sites in Iran and,
Yeah.
go beneath the ground and inspect them. Obviously, Iran is not going to allow us or anybody else around the world to do that. We have to rely, I assume, on satellite imagery or drone footage or human intelligence. How exactly are we confirming how much damage was done, given that these sites, I would describe them as inaccessible?
Yeah, look, my assumption is we're going to rely on all three, and our satellite imagery is better than anyone else's in the world in terms of being able to see what is going on in the ground. And I will say, on human intelligence in particular, this is where our alliance with Israel is so important, because the Mossad is unbelievably good at human intelligence, especially in Iran. You look at this 12-day war that Israel waged on Iran to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons and using nuclear weapons. Well, there were many things that were amazing about it, but one of the most incredible was the exquisite intelligence that Israel had. So in addition to bombing the living daylights out of military facilities and nuclear facilities across the country, Israel very deliberately decapitated the senior military leadership of Iran that would be the individuals who are waging war. And they systematically took out the Army Chief of Staff, the head of the IRGC, one after the other. And it became really quite incredible, where they'd take out one head of the IRGC, they would appoint someone new, and the next day they'd take out the new guy. And they'd appoint a third guy, and the next day they'd take out the third guy. I'm sure by the end of it, they're like, hey, do you want to leave the IRGC? And people are like, no, thank you. Because it was the speed and precision, one after the other, that is heavily driven by human intelligence, by the Mossad that has long had significant penetration into Iran. And so I have no doubt that Israel will be sharing that intelligence with the United States. And so it will be a combination of technology and human intelligence giving us the best information we can get about the current state of the nuclear research capability.
And going back to that CNN report for a second, if you as a sitting U.S. Senator have not gotten the classified briefing, because assumedly that means that we haven't fully collected the information necessary to give you an accurate picture of what actually happened, is the report that CNN was touting, what was the origin of that? Is that real?
So it was allegedly a leaked report from one defense intelligence analyst. That's what it purports to be.
So like from an intel agency?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I have no information on whether that leaked report is accurate or not. I just don't know one way or the other. I also don't know why they rescheduled the classified briefing. As I said, it was initially going to be yesterday afternoon, and it was all 100 senators. And whenever there's a major military conflict, these kind of briefings are pretty routine. We just got the notification that it was moved from yesterday to tomorrow. It may be because they have more intel they want to gather. It may just have been a scheduling conflict that you typically have senior officials from the Pentagon, from the CIA, from various intelligence organizations. So typically these briefings, you'll have 4 or 5 senior officials that are reporting on their respective responsibilities. The fact that it was delayed does not necessarily imply that they didn't have the intelligence yet. I don't know why it was rescheduled, but they moved it
Sure.
2 days.
Yeah, I can understand that. I guess I was making an inference that it meant that they still needed to collect something, but maybe it is just scheduling a meeting that everyone can actually attend here. What questions do you have going into that classified briefing? Like what is left on the table?
So for example, I'm pretty sure the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, went with President Trump to NATO. So that is a possible reason. If Hegseth is going to be in the briefing, he can't do it if he's in Europe. And so that's a conceivable reason for the rescheduling. I don't know that. I'm positing a guess, but that's the kind of thing that could be there, because you would usually have the Secretary of Defense, you would have the head of the CIA, you'd have you would have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And so if Hegseth was with the president in Europe, that's a pretty good reason to reschedule it to 48 hours later.
Yeah. No, that's understandable. I'm not trying to make a headline about a suspicious rescheduling without with a side comment of mine. Yeah. Do you have any specific questions going into that classified briefing? Anything left on the table that you want to know specifically?
Oh, look, I'll have lots of questions, and I suspect most of the senators will. I'll go into it initially just to listen, and the way those classified briefings, they occur in a SCIF, which is a secure compartmentalized facility. And they start typically with a presentation where each of the briefing officials will talk, usually about 5 minutes each, and they'll have a presentation. Here's what we know. Here's what happened. I assume DOD will lay out, here are the parameters of the strike. Here's what we did. We now know that there was a second decoy group of B-2s that went over to the Pacific that was designed to make Iran believe that was the strike package, so that they were not aware the actual strike package went across the Atlantic. So I assume those details will be briefed. Mm-hmm. And certainly a component will be, all right, what was the success? What exactly was hit? Is there significant radiation? If you're hitting nuclear facilities, there can be significant side effects. I'm sure people will ask about that. My approach will be initially just to listen, hear the presentation, and for the questions, I'll react to what they say and try to say, okay, what do we know? What's happening next? What are they doing next? How quickly can they rebuild their nuclear weapons program? I think the Ayatollah still wants a nuclear weapon. Everything he said and does is consistent with wanting a nuclear weapon. So I'm going to be interested in how rapidly could they reconstitute this program?
Well, that's it. That's sort of the underpinning question, too. There were some polls in the lead up to President Trump's military action that were conflicting. People did not want the U.S. to become militarily involved in the Israel-Iran conflict. And yet, if you separately polled the American people, this is people on the left and the right, and asked them if they want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, they said no, which kind of conflicts. Yeah. I mean, I obviously relate to not wanting the U.S. to get dragged into a forever war. I'm totally against that. I'm also against Iran having nuclear weapons. But the question is, we have been told by our own intelligence communities and our politicians, we've also heard this from Israeli politicians and Israeli intel for my entire lifetime, that Iran is on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon. So to me, this is the $1 million question. Does Iran have a nuke, or are they on the verge of getting a nuke? This sort of weeks and months away narrative has been a pretty long narrative. Over the weekend, Secretary of State Rubio made the case, he was interviewing with Margaret Brennan, that Iran's behavior, such as enriching uranium to 60%, their ICBMs, indicate that they are pursuing a nuke, because there's no other reason they would do any of those things unless they were pursuing a nuke. At the same time, there were some allegations on X that CIA Director Ratcliffe did not have our own intel, saying that Iran was just weeks or months away, that we were taking Israel's word for it. What do you know about this? Were we reliant on Israel's intel, or did we have specific, separate, independently verified U.S. intel on Iran's nuke program?
So I have not been told an answer to that one way or another. I will tell you, we regularly rely on Israel's intel, particularly concerning Iran. The Mossad they have a level of penetration that there's no other country on earth that has that level of penetration. And so Israel is exquisitely incentivized to know precisely what's occurring. And so when it comes to our intel, the two intel agencies, America and Israel's, cooperate very, very closely. I don't know the precise provenance of what we know. I do know that the Ayatollah repeatedly tells us he wants a nuclear weapon. He is explicit. This is a religious zealot who chants death to America. And when he says death to America, I believe him. He calls Israel the little Satan. He calls America the great Satan. Liz, you referenced the ICBM program. I think that is highly relevant. Iran was developing an ICBM program. As you know, ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. You do not need an ICBM for Iran to attack Israel. What Iran has been firing at Israel are ordinary ballistic missiles. Iran only needs an ICBM for one purpose, and that is to deliver a nuclear warhead to an American city, to cross the Atlantic. That's what he needs an ICBM for. And I believe what President Trump did Saturday night was decisive leadership. Yes, it was supporting Israel, but even more importantly, it was protecting millions of Americans, because an Iranian nuclear warhead detonated over New York City or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or any other American city could potentially kill millions. And so the president acted cleanly and decisively. And I will say on this issue, look, many Americans, you and me included, do not want to see us engaged in forever wars. Right. But that does not mean then that the president should be weak and an isolationist. It is that we live in a dangerous world, and the commander-in-chief has a responsibility to protect America. Now, listen, I look at the first term and second term of Donald Trump, and I agree with virtually every foreign policy decision he has made. That's not accidental, because for many, if not most of those decisions, I've been actively urging the course of conduct that he has agreed with.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Tucker Carlson interview. Look, that was a 2-hour bloodbath. Both of us.
I enjoyed it, actually.
I had a blast. I thought it was fun, although I did tweet out, they had one of those AI things where they turned Tucker and me into babies going back and forth.
Yeah.
And I laughed.
Those are weird.
They are weird. But look, I knew when Tucker asked me to do the show, I knew exactly what he was coming in to do. He was coming in to take a chainsaw to me. There was no mystery to it. I was not surprised by that. I knew exactly that's what Tucker wanted to do. But my view, you and I both know Tucker. I know Tucker very well. On 80% of issues, I agree emphatically with Tucker. Tucker's been great on COVID, on lockdowns, on vax mandates, on securing the border. All of that, I'm on exactly the same page with Tucker.
Yeah.
On foreign policy, I think Tucker has gone absolutely loony. He's gone, and it's a little weird because you look back during Iraq. During Iraq, he was an Iraq war cheerleader with a short miniskirt and pom-poms all day long. Look, I think the Iraq war was a mistake. In 2016, if you look at the presidential candidates, set aside Rand Paul because he's on one edge. Other than Rand, of the 17 Republicans who ran for president in 2016, there were only 2, me and Donald Trump, who said the Iraq war was a mistake. And so it's a little ironic that Tucker, having been one of the most vocal cheerleaders for that war, has suddenly become wildly isolationist. He predicted loudly, if President Trump strikes Iran, it will be World War III. Thousands of Americans will die. We will lose the war. Now, every single word of what Tucker predicted has proven to be wrong, has proven to be catastrophically wrong. And part of it is his predictions are utterly fact-free. They're made, they are rhetoric and talking points and not based on facts. So, for example, Tucker and I went round and round because I pointed out that Iran has been actively trying to murder President Donald Trump for several years now. And Tucker clutched his pearls and he started giggling in his high giggle, which is just weird, and saying, I don't know that. What? No, it can't be. Iran is not trying to murder. I've never heard that once in my life. And then this is where it's really weird. And I'm like, well, facts matter. Yes, it is a fact. By the way, the Department of Justice has indicted hitmen that Iran hired to kill President Trump. I put out, after the interview, a whole series. I put out video of President Trump talking about Iran trying to kill him. I put out video of one of the top Iranian leaders talking about their intention to kill President Trump. I put out the video the IRGC put out of a drone attack that they wanted to launch on Mar-a-Lago to kill President Trump in the golf course. But here was what was weird. Tucker bizarrely claims, no, I've never heard that they're trying to kill President Trump. That can't be true. And then he said, but if it is true, we should nuke Iran. And I'm like, okay, Tucker, that is really batty. You know what? That's the old neocon who was cheering on the Iraq war. No, we should not nuke Iran. That's not the right answer. The right answer is, frankly, what President Trump did on Saturday, a targeted but very effective bombing run that was focused on taking out the facilities that Israel lacked the military capability to take out. That actually is a commander-in-chief focused on protecting U.S. national security. And I got to say, in the fever swamps of the internet, things like fact and reason and the actual interest of protecting America somehow seem to fade away.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, like I said, I actually enjoyed watching it. I kind of like the feisty, passionate, mudslinging a little bit. It's kind of like, it reminds me of old fashioned debates. I did enjoy it. Have you talked to
So did
Tucker
I.
since the podcast, by the way? Are you guys still friends after that?
I haven't talked with him. We've texted a little bit, but I have not talked with him.
Did he apologize for calling you a sleazy feline since he was wrong about everything?
Of course not. And by the way,
Tucker.
he has not publicly apologized for being wrong about anything. He hasn't acknowledged he was wrong about anything. Instead, he goes on podcasts and just hurls insults at me. And I'm not going to respond in kind. I'm not going to hurl insults at him. What I am going to say is his foreign policy views are wrong. And I'm going to lay out why I believe they're wrong. But I don't like to engage in just gratuitous insults. And so, Tucker can make his own decisions about how he behaves.
Listen, we're all on the same page that we're happy about how this ended. And I'm not going to sit here and psychoanalyze him. I agree with, like you said, I agree with him 90% of the time. But on a few things, I diverge quite strongly. This foreign policy stuff is one of them. Maybe it's overcompensation because he, like many of us, had the wool pulled over our eyes by the intel communities, by the military industrial complex during Iraq. And so the overcompensation now is fearing that any military involvement will lead to us being dragged by neocons into forever war. It's sort of an understandable human nature reaction. It's just something we have to temper because that's a false choice to think you have to either be an isolationist or a neocon.
I think both are wrong.
So do I. My last question for you is what we expect moving forward from Iran. We've heard reports of sleeper cells, Iranian operatives here in the United States. Trump said yesterday, President Trump said Biden let over 1,000 Iranian operatives in thanks to his open borders policies. Attorney General Pam Bondi testified the same thing in Congress. She said might be less than 1,500, over 1,000. I mean, just this weekend in Alabama, there was an Iranian army sniper with his Iranian military ID card on his person arrested. Should we be worried about Iranian sleeper cells domestically here in the United States?
Absolutely, yes. It is dangerous. And understand, when I supported President Trump's bombing the Iranian nuclear weapons facilities, I didn't do so through this naive view that nothing bad will happen and it will just be wonderful and hunky-dory. It is a dangerous time, and it's dangerous. And in fact, I laid out on my podcast, and Liz, you're one of 3 living human beings who has been co-host of Verdict with Ted Cruz. And so I'm grateful I missed those days when we did the podcast together.
Those were fun.
We did a lot of them. And
by the way, guys, you could go back into the archives, forgive the interruption. Senator Cruz and I did a deep dive on his foreign policy views because I used to say all of these politicians don't have any philosophy on foreign policy. They just make the decision in the moment. And we went deep because Senator Cruz is the exception to that rule. And it was probably like, an hour where we were getting into like the nerdy stuff on it. It was really good. If I do say so myself, you were great on it.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I'm glad you didn't ask me the population of Iran. But other than that, and look, I got to admit on that, okay, this sounds a little self-serving to say. If I had guessed a number, the number that was in the back of my head that I was going to guess was 90 million. Tucker said it was 92. According to the internet afterwards, it's 89 million. But the weird thing is population numbers can be strange. There are countries that are bizarrely big or little. And I just was like, no, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to guess a number and potentially be significantly off.
Right.
Because that's a stupid, I mean, you saw the meme, which I tweeted out, and a lot of other people did too, of Tucker asking Luke Skywalker, what's the population of the Death Star? It's like, well, no, that would not be the most salient fact. The most salient fact is it's led by a theocratic zealot who has stated he wants to murder Americans, and he's actively working to develop nuclear weapons to murder Americans. That's the salient fact in terms of defending ourselves. But you asked about the risk, and what I outlined on Verdict is 3 different categories of risk. One category of risk is a major missile attack on Israel targeting civilians. Throughout this war, Israel and the United States targeted military targets in Iran. Iran responded by firing missiles at Tel Aviv, firing missiles at heavily populated civilian areas, and just trying to kill as many Jews as possible. And so one real potential consequence of Saturday's bombing run is Iran could have unleashed a massive barrage that could have killed a significant number of Israelis. That was risk number 1. Risk number 2 is Iran could have done the same thing, launching missiles targeting American servicemen and women. We have thousands of servicemen and women stationed throughout the Middle East, and Iran could have targeted American soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. Now, I will say President Trump was very explicit in saying to the Iranian government, if you target and kill American servicemen and women, you will face very serious repercussions. I called the president about a week ago and thanked him for that, said, thank you for making that crystal clear, because you're keeping our servicemen and women safe by limiting Iran's willingness to attack them. They fired a few missiles into Qatar at our base there, but the missiles were intercepted and there were no casualties. So that, at least to date, has not manifested. But to be clear, that is a risk going forward. And then the third risk is the specific one you talked about, which is terrorism in the United States, the potential of Iranian sleeper cells. We know for 4 years, Joe Biden had a wide open southern border. Over 12 million illegal immigrants flooded into this country. We are told that the Biden administration released into this country over 1,200 Iranian illegal immigrants. So that's 1,200, but that's not the whole of the universe. The scariest number in terms of the open borders of the last 4 years is the number 2 million. 2 million is the number of known gotaways. Known gotaways are people we know crossed into this country. Their signs, their tracks. We see them on sensors, but we did not apprehend them. They got away. And the reason that number is so scary is the gotaways are by far the most likely to be criminals, to be murderers, to be rapists, to be child molesters, to be Venezuelan gang members, or to be terrorists, to be Hamas or Hezbollah or Iranian terrorists. And so among those 2 million, we don't know how many were terrorists. But Joe Biden and the Democrats effectively rolled out the red carpet and said, if you're a terrorist, come to America. We know that the Biden Customs and Border Patrol agents had been instructed to be on the lookout for Hamas terrorists, Hezbollah terrorists, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists. Specifically, they were instructed in writing to be on the lookout for them. And so, look, should folks be worried? Yes, the Trump administration is being very vigilant against the risk of terrorism. Local law enforcement is being very vigilant, and all of us individually should. And so I'm not at all diminishing that there are real risks. I just think the risks of the Ayatollah having a nuclear weapon which could murder thousands or even millions of Americans, that risk was greater, which is why the commander-in-chief acted decisively to stop that risk. And I got to tell you, the whole point of the 2-hour Tucker interview is my view is President Trump is right and Tucker's wrong. And I stand with the president. And part of the reason I agreed to do the interview is Tucker Carlson had been attacking President Trump over and over again and saying he was complicit in war. And his attacks were really, they were mean-spirited and they were not based on facts. And so I did the interview because I wanted to make clear I agree with President Trump's foreign policy. Tucker in his newsletter insanely claimed Donald Trump is not America first. And as President Trump rightly said, well, since I'm the guy that invented the term and put it out there, I damn sure decide who's America first and not. And that would be me and not you, Tucker. And by the way, letting Iran having a nuclear weapon that can murder a bunch of Americans is not America first. That exchange is really important. And so I went on the show to make clear that President Trump is right. And I agree with his decisive leadership as commander-in-chief.
It's moments like these that I'm really grateful for President Trump as president, because Iran is not going to retaliate against us and get away with it. Exactly. As the president says, and Iran knows this, and all American citizens can be confident that President Trump will follow through if Iran does anything. Did you know about the attack, by the way, before the impending attack, before you went on Tucker?
I did. When I went on Tucker, I did not know about the specific details of the attack. I knew that there was a very real possibility. There was an active debate within the administration. I speak with President Trump regularly. Tucker was actively lobbying the president to say, don't attack, don't attack. And that's where he gave this parade of horribles. It'll be World War III. Thousands of Americans will die and we will lose the war. And look, there needs to be some level of accountability when you make predictions about what's going to happen and your predictions are wildly and totally wrong. People ought to say, okay, that's worth noting that what you say is going to happen is not true.
Yeah, that's how I feel about a lot of the people who were fear-mongering during COVID. Might want to think about whether we'd listen to them now, given their complete absence of judgment back then. All right, Senator, thank you so much for being on the show. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you. It reminds me of all the hours we used to spend filming on Verdict, which I also enjoyed. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Take care, Liz.
All right, guys, what the heck happened in New York City last night? A weirdo, and I'm talking a real nutcase, socialist. I mean, I would call him a Marxist. He's not just a socialist. Muslim won the Democratic primary for New York City mayor. The result, and he won decisively, by the way, against one of New York State's ruling families, the Cuomos. Zohran Mamdani, we talked about him yesterday, just a little bit. He won the Democratic primary last night. As of right now, there's 93% of the votes counted. Mamdani has 43.5% compared to Cuomo's 36.4%. So it wasn't even close. There was a third Democrat candidate, Brand Lander, who got 11%. The sitting mayor, Eric Adams, declined to run as a Democrat because he's rejecting the Democrat Party. He's going to run in the general election as an independent. So that will change some of the numbers. There's also a Republican candidate who's running in the general election, although the voting demographic of New York, registered Republicans are like 11% of the New York city voting electorate. So does a Republican stand a chance? I don't know. But here's the thing. We can talk about what a nutcase this guy is, and we're going to talk about what makes him a nutcase. But we should be sitting here today asking how this happened. Like really practical, nitty-gritty questions. Why did this Marxist nutcase win a primary? How did this happen? There is one reason that explains the whole thing. And it's not because he's a liar. It's not because someone recently said, or I might have seen this on X, said, he ran one of the best campaigns ever. No, he didn't. He didn't. That's not the reason why. There is one reason why this guy won. And it's a reason that truly should frighten us all because the impacts reach way outside of the boundaries of New York City. So that's what we're going to talk about here in just a second. But first, I want to talk to you about Preborn, one of the sponsors that we are so grateful for on this show. Their ministry is quite literally life-saving. Yesterday, of course, was June 24th. It marked 3 years since Roe v. Wade was overturned. The day Roe v. Wade was overturned was one of those, where were you on the day Roe v. Wade was overturned situations for me. I remember where I was. I was at a Young Americans a YAF conference out in Santa Barbara, California. And it was just, you felt like you were floating on clouds. All of these decades and decades of effort to get this unconstitutional law that allowed the slaughter of babies was overturned. Thank you, Jesus. But here's the thing. In the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned, abortion numbers actually didn't go down. They surged to a 10-year high because the battleground of the battle of abortion shifted from the courtroom to our homes. Young women were no longer going into the abortion clinic to get abortions. Today, over 60% of abortions, that's more than 6 out of 10 abortions, happen when a woman takes the abortion pill at her home, alone, in silence, in agony. Preborn network of clinics are standing in this gap. They're meeting women in their most desperate hour. And here's what they're seeing. They're seeing young mothers terrified and misled by our culture, told that their babies are clumps of cells, told that children will hold them back, told that they're ruining their life and they're never going to reach their potential if they don't abort this child. And so these young mothers, coerced by sometimes the father of their baby or their friends or their bosses or their own mothers, are delivering their dead babies, tiny, perfectly formed, into a puddle of blood on the bathroom floor. These precious babies, once called just tissue, now lie lifeless. When you give to Preborn, you are not just saving a baby, you're saving a mother too, because when these mothers go and get an ultrasound at a Preborn network of one of the Preborn clinics, and they see the picture of their baby on that ultrasound screen, they are more than likely to choose life. So when you give to Preborn, you are not only saving a baby's life, you're saving that mother too. You're giving her hope and financial support and the truth. Preborn has already rescued over 350,000 babies, but there are so many more who need your help. Your tax-deductible gift makes this mission possible. If you have ever considered it, even for a second, please donate now. Dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. And when you hear yourself say that word, know that your donation is saving a child's life. That's pound 250 keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/Liz. That's preborn.com/Liz. Thank you for your life-saving work. Okay, back to New York City. yesterday in the Democratic primary for New York City mayor, a socialist Marxist nutcase named Zohran Mamdani won the election. He won the Democratic primary. He beat Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo's from the New York ruling family of Democrats, the Cuomos. And yet Zohran Mamdani won by a lot. It wasn't even close. Why? Why did this happen? Why? That's what we're going to examine right now, because there is one reason, and I'm going to walk you through some numbers so you can see exactly what led to this victory and why we should fear for the general election in New York City, because we might just see a repeat of this once you understand why Zohran Mamdani won. And it's not because he's charismatic. It's not because he gets the problems of New Yorkers. It's not because he ran some phenomenal campaign. It's none of that. It's not because he's good at social media. It's none of that. It's because of the demographic of voter who voted for him. So walk through a couple of numbers with me and you'll see, I'll lead you to the conclusion of why Zohran Mamdani won out of nowhere this Democratic primary. So, of registered voters in New York City, 65% of them are Democrat. Only 11% of registered voters in New York City are Republican. 21.1% are independent. So a tiny fraction who are Republican, a majority who are Democrat, but a hefty number who are independent. Put a pin in that. We're going to go through just a couple of numbers. The average age of a registered voter in New York City is 49 years old. Now, this is important because those of us who are on the younger side of the millennial generation, I am 35, I will be 36 next month, think of ourselves as young, but the upper edge of the millennial generation is getting towards middle age now. 49 is actually one of the old millennials. They're still in what I would call at least how we perceive them to be, the young voters. It's Gen Z and millennials that are still of the four generations that are voting. Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, 49 and down, from 18 to 49, are still those Gen Z and those millennial voters. Again, this is really important, and you'll see why as we get to this next statistic. So in New York City, there are 5.1 million registered voters in total. 5.1 million. Got to remember that number for a second. Between 750 and 850,000 of those 5 million are Gen Z. They're between the ages of 18 and 29 years old. Additionally, between 1.6 and 1.8 of that 5.1 million registered New York City voters are between the ages of 30 and 49. So I'll just do the math for you. You don't have to get out your scribble sheet and do the math to follow along. That means that 2.5 million, approximately, of New York City's registered voters, that is half of registered voters in New York City, are what I call indoctrinated kids. Now, what do I mean when I call them indoctrinated kids? Obviously, a 49-year-old is not a kid. So what do I mean when I use this phrase, indoctrinated kids? Well, if you look at the breakdown of who voted for Zohran Mamdani versus who voted for Andrew Cuomo, you will find that it was white, college-educated liberals who voted for Zohran Mamdani versus the working class who voted for Andrew Cuomo. Again, this is key, because what has been one of the defining experiences of, put aside Gen Z for a second, of the millennial generation. I'll give you an example of what I mean here. I'll make my point by illustrating. Back when I hosted a show on One America News Network, I hosted a top-rated nightly primetime TV show. I had a segment on my show once a week, every Friday at the end of the show, called Campus Madness. And what we did on this segment called Campus Madness is we took reports from college campuses all over the country of conservative students who were facing discrimination because of liberal professors or liberal college groups or liberal student body votes or whatever it might be. These conservatives were facing discrimination for their viewpoints. Their free speech was being restricted. They were getting bullied. And so we covered it. We exposed this reality that the millennial generation was experiencing, that colleges are liberal. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, yeah, Liz, duh, that's obvious. Yes, it is obvious. And it became more obvious thanks to the internet and independent journalists starting to report this, and the courage of these conservative kids on campus exposing this, it wasn't always as common of knowledge as it is right now. But it wasn't just conservative students that were facing discrimination on college campuses. The implications of what was happening when our universities were taken over by leftists is that, yes, conservatives were very genuinely facing discrimination, and that's awful. But all the students that weren't conservative, even if they didn't step onto that college campus as a diehard leftist, they turned into one by the time they left. Because say they came from a family who didn't talk about politics that much. They weren't very principled in their political viewpoints yet. And they get to the college campus and they start facing what at the time, 10 years ago, was the beginnings of wokeism. This very anti-American, revisionist history worldview that they were indoctrinated into. And by the time they left those college campuses, there was this old trope that boomers used to say that, oh, wait until these millennials get to the real world and see how it works. Wait until they get outside the bubble of their college campuses. And that's actually not what happened. What happened is they exported the radical leftist ideology in which they were indoctrinated into the real world. They brought it with them. And so when I say the indoctrinated kids, I'm talking about the millennial generation. And I know technically, by the way, I'm reading the live chat. Technically, ages 45 to 49 are Gen X. And I know Gen X is extremely protective of their identity. So let the record show 45 to 49 is Gen X, but you count for the purposes of the point that I'm making here, because you also experienced on college campuses exactly what I'm laying out. You experienced, if you were conservative, discrimination. If you were politically neutral, kind of bleeding heart, leftist, liberal stereotype of a college student, you became much more leftist on college. And you didn't just leave that at the door when you left campus and joined the real world. You brought that with you. That's part of why we saw all this wokeness in corporations. It wasn't just the ESG metrics that came from BlackRock that were filtering from the top down. There was also a bottom-up effect with all of these young people that were being hired to work at these corporations that brought their wokeness with them. HR departments exploded because of all this victimhood complex that came with the millennial generation specifically. Now, when we're talking about Gen Z, the problem has only been exacerbated. It is exponentially worse. Now on college campuses, it's not just discrimination against conservatives. It's not just, oh, you're going to be a liberal by the time you leave. It is outright hatred of America. It's embracing socialism and Marxism and communism, rejecting God, rejecting family, rejecting natural law. Children who are sent to college now have a high likelihood of coming out of it revolutionary. And so when I use this phrase, indoctrinated kids, when I say that half of registered voters in New York City, 2.5 million of the 5.1 total registered voters in New York City are between the ages of 18 and 49, the indoctrinated kids, what I mean is that all of that indoctrination was successful. When these people cast their votes, now that they are adults living in the real world, they're not looking at their paycheck and seeing taxes and coming to their senses. They are voting for what they were taught is right and moral in college. They're voting for the socialist Marxist nutcase because he is a socialist Marxist nutcase. To call this a problem does not adequately describe the enormity of the flashing red warning light that we should be seeing when we're looking at what's happening in New York City. The fact that Zohran Mamdani, this Muslim immigrant who's been an American citizen for 7 years, who is an outright Marxist, the fact that he won the Democratic primary is a result of universities indoctrinating youth who voted for him. It's also the result of unrestricted immigration. And I know some people will say, Liz, he wasn't an illegal alien. Well, perhaps not, but the left's open borders philosophy is not just permissiveness towards crimes being committed as aliens breach our southern border. It is also an attitude, and this was quite literally in the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security documents behind the scene, was to view all immigration policies and to form them to be as permissive as possible, to bring in as many people as possible. And Zohran Mamdani is a perfect example of that. So the question, of course, it's kind of startling when you realize that this is going to be the new playbook. This is what we're facing in not just in New York City. This is going to be the reality when Gen Z and the millennial generation are the largest voting demographic, when boomers begin to die off. Sorry to be morbid here, but when they no longer are casting their votes, we're going to see these indoctrinated kids, because they were indoctrinated as kids. That's what I mean. They're going to be voting for evil because they were taught that evil is right. So we need to prevent this. We need to stop this from happening. So at least the next generation is not being indoctrinated into voting for Marxist nutcases like Zohran. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we have to look at universities, and we can't just expose the corruption verbally and on the news. We can't just highlight instances where conservatives are being facing discrimination, or where Marxist policies are being imposed on people. We should do both of those things, but we also have to cut this off at the root. And what I mean by that is, even universities that claim that they're private universities, they still get government money. Even private universities get government money through research grants and through federally subsidized student loans. And that doesn't even take into account the public universities that are getting a lot more state and federal dollars than just student loans and research grants. We have to stop that. And this is something the Trump administration can do. This is something that can be done at the Department of Education, and something that can be done by governors in red states and departments of education in red states. If there is indoctrination in socialism, Marxism, communism, anti-Americanism, racism, they lose their federal funding. Everything. They lose their access to federally subsidized student loans. They lose their research grants. You know, these college professors wouldn't have jobs if it weren't for the fact that they get research grants from the federal government. It's not like universities are profitable just because of tuition dollars. The teaching is something a lot of these professors just kind of do on the side. What they actually want to do is write papers about why you're an evil bigot or something. Cut the funding. Cut the funding, and do it now. Otherwise, what's happening in New York City is going to happen all across the country. It's not just about discrimination against conservative students. What's happening on our college campuses is changing our nation before our very eyes into a Marxist hellhole. And by the way, these young people, these Gen Zers and these millennials, we have enjoyed incredible prosperity in our country. America is so freaking cool. We have a booming economy. We have never lacked for anything that we wanted, or at least the opportunity to try to achieve anything that we want. And because of that, because we have never waited in a Soviet-style bread line, because we have never been in a concentration camp, sometimes that's hard for us to imagine what that's like. It's hard to imagine what even a food shortage might be like, which is somewhat of an ironic and intentional example that I'm giving, because Zohran Mamdani, we talked about this on the show yesterday, he promises to have government-run, government-owned grocery stores in New York City to make food more affordable. And he said that they're not going to be operating on a profit motive. And he promises that New Yorkers are going to get to pocket the savings. They're going to save money because food's not going to cost as much. That's his promise. And clearly voters are falling for this. Oh, yeah. Play this video.
Skyrocketed. Some grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm Zohran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent, and will pass on those savings to you.
So what's going to happen, of course, is that would put out of business all grocery store competitors. So all privately owned grocery stores would not be able to compete with these government operated food banks. And the result of that would be a food shortage. New Yorkers wouldn't have enough food to go around. They wouldn't have access to the food they needed because this socialist has not read his history books and doesn't understand what happens when government seizes the production and distribution of food. The millennial generation and Gen Z never experienced food shortages. So when I say that, it's like an intangible threat. It's an intangible warning. They don't know what it's like. And so it's hard to take that as seriously as being annoyed about how much they just paid for eggs and milk. They desire this utopia that just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. For example, a perfect example of this, and this is, by the way, where Democrats often succeed in the public or the public's perception of their policies. Bring this post up on the screen, Spencer, if you would, of that viral post about the barbecue. You have it on screen right now. Okay, so look at this. This went completely viral on X a couple days ago, or a couple weeks ago. It's a picture of a grocery store aisle, shelves filled with barbecue sauces. And the caption on this photo is, "Capitalism can't give you a working healthcare system, but it can give you 175 different kinds of barbecue sauce." 5.8 million people viewed this point because it is kind of interesting. Like, look at all that barbecue sauce. Like, how do you even choose which one you want? That is a ridiculous number of options. And a lot of people didn't click into the post to read the responses. But if you do click into the post to read the responses, look at that one. It says capitalism and free markets would fix the U.S. healthcare system, which suffers a lack of capitalism and free markets. Oh, yes, that's right. It's not that capitalism broke our healthcare system. It's that it's overregulated by politicians. And this is the perpetual conundrum of conservatives and Republicans. When there is some kind of pithy marketing campaign like that barbecue post that's like an anti-capitalist, catchy slogan, people see that and they're like, oh, wow, look at that illustrated. Why can't we get better healthcare if we can get all these barbecue bottles? And then Republicans come with our nerdy white papers and we're like, actually, the overregulation in the healthcare industry is what causes the problem. And listen, we're actually right. Practically and morally, our nerdy white papers are correct, but it's just not quite as catchy as the picture of the barbecue. That is Zohran Mamdani in a nutshell. And because these young generations of voters, millennials and Gen Z, have enjoyed tremendous prosperity, and we've never faced the adversity of food shortages, for example, we believe in utopia that doesn't exist. And then you compound that with the indoctrination on college campuses that turns normal people not just into bleeding heart leftists, but into committed socialists and Marxists, even communist revolutionaries. And this is what you get. Half of registered voters in the city of New York are in that indoctrinated kids generation, and 1 million registered voters in that age demographic. So that means 20% of total registered voters in New York City are college educated. College educated, but during the indoctrination years. Do you think that didn't make a difference? I mean, we talk about deciding factors in elections. Sometimes it's a demographic that's 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 or 10. 20% are college educated and Gen Z and millennial. That is why Zohran Mamdani won the Democrat primary for mayor of New York City. And it's why we should fear what happens in the general election, despite the fact, this is what I would do, by the way, if I were running in the general election to defeat Zohran Mamdani. What I would do if I were running against him is I would remind Democrat voters, because in a sense, even if you're the Republican candidate, or even if you're Eric Adams running as an independent, Republican votes are a small minority of votes in New York City. What, 11%? Isn't that the number we said before? So you're going to have to make the case to Democrats why they shouldn't vote for the Marxist Zohran. So what's the case that you make to Democrats? Well, you focus on what we've been calling the 80-20 issues that 80% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, we all agree about them. And fortunately, or unfortunately for New York City, depending on the ultimate outcome of this election, Zohran Mamdani is on the wrong side of all 4 critical 80-20 issues in our country right now. Crime, Zohran Mamdani is a defund the police champion. He calls the police white supremacist and oppressive and anti-queer a billion times. Look at this series of screenshots of him supporting defunding the police. New York City, by the way, tried defunding the police. And what happened? You were hurt. You became less safe. Your stuff was stolen. Your families were assaulted. And so they refunded the police, even though it's a liberal city, because defunding the police is dangerous. Zohran Mamdani is on the wrong side of that 80-20 issue. What about the border crisis? The majority of Americans, the vast majority, are against open borders. They're against the invasion of illegal aliens. Not Zohran Mamdani. He is for them. He is against the ICE raids. He's, in fact, said he wanted to stand up to President Trump and work to stop federal immigration raids in the city. This is what he said.
A city where they can do more than just struggle. One where those who toil in the night can enjoy the fruits of their labor in the day. Where hard work is repaid with a stable life. Where 8 hours on the factory floor or behind the wheel of a cab is enough to pay the mortgage. It is enough to keep the lights on. It is enough to send your kid to school. Where rent-stabilized apartments are actually stabilized. Where buses are fast and free. Where childcare doesn't cost more than CUNY. And where public safety keeps us truly safe. And it's where the mayor will use their power to reject Donald Trump's fascism. To stop mass ICE agents from deporting our neighbors. And to govern our city as a model for the Democratic Party.
And by the way, Zohran Mamdani's opposition to ICE raids in New York City, calling these illegal aliens your neighbors. Are you calling the sex offender your neighbor? Are you calling the murderer your neighbor? Are you calling the international gangbanger your neighbor? This came on the heels of sitting New York City Mayor Eric Adams reversing his immigration policy when he realized it was unsustainable to house illegal aliens in luxury hotels. The people of New York City rejected the open borders, sanctuary city garbage that was being imposed on them, and Zohran Mamdani wants to bring that back. And then, of course, he holds a viewpoint that all Marxist revolutionaries hold. He is anti-white. This is not just a feature of his philosophy. This is an underpinning of his philosophy. This is critical race theory, again, an 80-20 issue. People across the country recognize that it is evil to look at someone and say, you're inherently racist because of the color of your skin. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. The vast, vast, vast majority of people reject that evil. But Zohran Mamdani embraces it and preaches it. Zohran Mamdani also wants to use $65 million of taxpayer money to trans kids. You heard that correctly. To trans kids. He calls it, of course, gender affirming care, and minors are included in what he wants to do, taking your taxpayer money, using it to pay doctors to trans kids. An 80-20 issue. I think that's not even 80-20. That's like 90-10. That's like 98-2, because it's so abjectly evil. Abjectly evil. This is what I would do if I were running against Zohran Mamdani and I wanted to defeat him, and I had to defeat him among Democrats. Focus on the 80-20 issues, because Zohran Mamdani is a radical. He's a socialist. He's a Marxist. He's a communist. The reason he won this primary is because of the indoctrinated kids. And by the way, Mamdani is an indoctrinated kid himself. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a professor at Columbia University. And Zohran Mamdani went himself to a ritzy, snooty, elitist liberal arts college in Maine. He is the embodiment of the indoctrinated kids. Again, we can stop this right now. Defund these universities, their research grants. Defund these universities, these federally subsidized student loans. Tell them if they don't stop turning out communists, they're done. President Trump can do this. The Department of Education can do this. Governors in red states can do this. Departments of Education in red states can do this. And we ought to. Otherwise, what's happening in New York City is going to happen next in your community. Quick note before we go today, Allie Beth Stuckey asked me to remind you that she's hosting the second annual Share the Arrows event at the Credit Union of Texas Event Center in Allen, Texas on October 11th. Her lineup this year includes Ginger Duggar Volo, Alyssa Childers, Shauna Holman, Taylor Dukes, Katie Faust, and Francesca Battistelli. Now, tickets went really fast last year, and Allie is expecting another sold-out crowd this year. You can get all the details and tickets right now at sharethearrows.com. Make sure to check out the VIP option. There are VIP seats still available, but you might have to get those fast because they are going fast. Again, that's sharethearrows.com. Grab your tickets today. And make sure you are subscribed to this show, youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler, blazetv.com/Liz. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.